The scenario I would like to talk about today is not work related, but I believe I can apply the principles of emotional intelligence that I discuss here when working in a team. The background to the situation is that I have lived next door to a family of 5 for about 3 years. Although we always engage in pleasantries, we don't socialise, but the teenage children often come around in summer to use my swimming pool, and I have always welcomed them. 4 weeks ago, I went to bring my rubbish bin in on a Friday morning after collection, but it was not there. I searched everywhere, but I couldn't find it, and eventually peered over my next-door neighbour's fence to see that it was in their backyard. My first thought was that a member of the family had taken it by mistake, so I didn't do anything. Later in the morning, the bin had been put back on the street and was half full of rubbish. Again, I assumed that someone at the next-door residence had accidentally started to fill the bin, realised that it was mine, and had quickly put it back on the street, so I didn't approach them on the matter. The following week, the same thing happened, and as I peered again over my next-door neighbour's fence to find my bin, I must admit that I felt shocked that someone would take the liberty to do this, and I was quite angry. However, I avoided the issue because although I was affronted at their lack of communication, I also felt that it was a very trivial thing to complain about, and to be honest, like many people, I avoid confrontation. Then it happened again for the third week in a row. This time, when the garbage bin had been placed back on the street, I went around and rang my neighbour's doorbell. At that time, I had not planned what I was going to say and what I wanted the outcome to be, which perhaps would have been a good idea. I had reflected on what was causing me to be annoyed, and it was not so much the family using my bin, but the surreptitious, disrespectful way they went about it. The cleaner answered the door and said that my neighbour, Georgia, who is a beautician, was in her studio doing a treatment. I asked her to ask Georgia to come around and see me, which she did later in the morning. I had agonised about whether to say anything to my neighbours at all. I didn't want a conflict, but I also thought that if they wished to use my bin, they should have asked me. Therefore, I decided that I had to be assertive in this situation. But because it had gone unaddressed for 3 weeks in a row, rather than being assertive, I was hostile, in that I found myself glaring at Georgia when she came round and not listening to what she was saying. She immediately admitted that it was her rubbish and started to explain what had happened, but that made me angrier, and I didn't listen. I told her to get the rubbish out of my bin and never to put it in there again. A global study by Gunkel in 2016 found that the preferences for conflict handling styles are relatively stable across different situations, and that an individual's preferred conflict handling style is largely predetermined by individual characteristics, such as personality traits. To me, this shows that it is vitally important to approach any situation with caution and to constantly keep a check of one's emotions. This is where the 5 attributes of emotional intelligence, according to Daniel Goleman, come into play. They are motivation, social skills, self-awareness, self-regulation, and empathy. I will discuss how these relate to a potentially different approach and outcome to the situation I have described. In the past, I have been rather hasty in my assumptions about people's behaviour, and in this situation, I eventually arrived at a negative belief about the neighbour's attitude without exploring the possible reasons behind it. A different approach could have been motivated by a wish to live in harmony with my neighbours. I feel optimistic that we can maintain a good relationship, and this should motivate me to not jump to negative conclusions in future and to not allow this small issue to grow into something disproportionately big. If I had used good social skills, I would have smiled and welcomed Georgia into my home when she came around to see me. I could have explained that the reason I had popped round earlier was to ask if it was their rubbish in my bin and listen to her answer. If I had made appropriate eye contact and listened to Georgia, I would have learned that one of the 2 bins which they had been given by council had gone missing several weeks ago, and that the cleaner had assumed that mine was their second bin. I still could not understand that if this was the case, why the bin was immediately placed back on the street on collection day, but I would have quickly decided that to pursue this line of questioning was insignificant and futile. I could have given Georgia the benefit of the doubt and suggested that she may be able to request a replacement by emailing the council. I could have said that if she sees space in my bin on the evening before collection day, she is welcome to put their rubbish in it. Relating to self-awareness, Daniel Goleman, in his 1996 book on emotional intelligence, states that self-awareness is a neutral mode that maintains self-reflectiveness even amid turbulent emotions. I should have asked myself why I was so annoyed by the fact that my neighbours did not ask permission to use the bin. Was I making a big deal out of a trivial matter? If I had tried to focus on a positive aspect of the situation, I could easily have offered to provide space in my bin to the large family next door. I recognised that I had been triggered emotionally by perceiving that someone had taken advantage of my easygoing nature. When Georgia came round to see me, I could have ensured that my facial muscles remained soft, kept check of this, and observed this effect I was having on her as we spoke, checking that I wasn't glaring at her and that I communicated that I was listening by remaining silent and nodding. I should have constantly checked in with myself to ensure that I was identifying my emotions correctly. Leading on from this is self-regulation. I should have gathered my thoughts before ringing the doorbell. If I had stopped to reflect on my feelings, I would have reminded myself that in the scheme of life, this was a trivial matter. Regardless of how annoyed I was, though, I should have taken a few deep breaths and been in control of my feelings rather than allowing my feelings to control me. I could have shown empathy if I had listened actively and would have heard Georgia explain that one of their bins had gone missing. As Goleman states, empathy involves being a good listener and question asker, and respecting differences in how people feel about things. I would have shown more empathy if I had thought back to when my own family was young, several years ago. I knew that no matter how much one tries, it can be difficult to keep waste to a minimum. So I do understand that it would be stressful to only have one small bin for a large family. I could have said that this week she could leave the rubbish in my bin and that in future, if there is any space in it just before pick-up day, she would be welcome to fill it. I feel confident that if a similar situation were to arise, having studied emotional intelligence, I could approach the situation without an unnecessarily hostile confrontation. I have learned a great deal from this situation and the short exchange that ensued, and although it is not work-related, I believe that I can apply the principles of emotional intelligence that I have learned here to a work environment. A paper on workplace conflict management by Overton and Lowry in 2013 states that it is important not to use the perceived difficulty of a conversation to determine whether it will be beneficial and appropriate to proceed. It showed that multiple studies confirm that when conflict is successfully addressed, it results in multiple benefits to the organisation and individuals involved. I would like to add that what I have also learned from this situation is that I must have a plan of what I'm going to say beforehand and not to procrastinate when it comes to dealing with conflict.